Hello, I'm Perrin Beatty, President and CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, and welcome to the Business of Business. Throughout the COVID-19 crisis, I'll be having a series of conversations with experts about the pandemic and about the impact that it's having on Canadian business. We're very fortunate today to have an outstanding Canadian, someone who is right at the center of the government's response to the COVID-19 crisis and providing assistance to business. Mairead Lavery is a native of Northern Ireland, but she is also the first woman ever to head EDC, Export Development Canada. Now, most of us know Export Development Canada as Canada's export financing agency that assists exporters going abroad. But what the government did during the crisis was to decide that EDC would be one of the key agencies that it would use in providing assistance to Canadian business. And I hope over the course of our conversation to have a chance to chat with Mairead about the role that EDC is playing today, some of the priorities and challenges, and where we go from here. So welcome, Mairead. We're delighted to have you.
Thank you, Perrin. I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for the opportunity. And thanks for that very generous introduction.
Well, tell us how EDC's role has changed. You've taken a right angle turn here. And what have been some of the challenges there? What is the role of EDC during the crisis?
Yeah, thanks for that, Perrin. So as you mentioned, our mandate is to really help Canadian companies that are looking to do business and grow their business internationally. So that's been our very traditional mandate. But similar to the 2008-2009 crisis, our government has decided to issue us domestic powers, a very technical government term. But what that really means is EDC, as a Crown Corporation and agency of the Government of Canada, is opening up its whole product suite to all Canadian companies, and then helping the government develop some other programs that could help Canadian companies and trying to bring those to Canadian companies very quickly. So it's a very big shift for EDC. Last year, we served about 17,000 companies, and we do that in three very clear ways. First off, we provide knowledge products, a little bit like you, Perrin, at the Chamber, through your website, through webinars, through actually trying to get to your members the information they need at the time. We do the same. We tend to provide country forecasts. We provide information on how to make exporting easier. And now we provide information around how to access government programs during this time. We also provide insurance products. And people will traditionally know us for providing accounts receivable insurance. Of course, we continue to do that, and we have in fact expanded our programs during this time. And then finally, the financing products that EDC is known for as well. So that's our traditional business. We continue to do that. Now it's open for all domestic companies across Canada, and then the new programs, which I'm sure you'll want to chat to me about.
Tell us about the new program. How much the government put in, literally billions more money into supporting Canadian business. Tell us about what's happened in terms of the share of that has gone to EDC.
Yeah, so thanks, Perrin. It was interesting, and it's been an evolution. The first thing the government had to do was some very legislative things to actually make sure EDC had sufficient share capital, EDC had these domestic powers that I talk about, and that EDC could continue to operate in these very difficult times. So they did that day one. I was very impressed with how fast that happened. The second thing was really setting up the criteria and the principles. And the principle was that we need to focus on the companies that have the least access to capital first. And really that has meant focus on smaller companies rather than larger companies. So all of the programming has been really truly focused on getting to small companies and individuals before it deals with companies that have stronger banking relationships and different access to different types of capital. So with that, we then started to work with the government to develop the Canada Emergency Business Account, and the officials asked EDC to be their agent in establishing that program and establishing on their parameters how we would actually make that money flow. So if you remember, Perrin, that's the $40,000 loan, $10,000 of which is forgivable if it's repaid before December 2022. So a significant amount, and meant to reach a significant amount of companies The initial sizing of that program was for companies with a payroll between $50,000 and $1 million. And we felt that that would reach 750,000 companies across Canada. That program has now been expanded to between $20,000 of payroll and 1.5 million. And that would probably take the program up to actually touch 1 million companies across Canada. Today, we're live on the program for just about 2 weeks, and I'm really proud to say that so far we've served over 450,000 companies, and with more than $20 billion actually allocated to the financial institutions and has actually flown to companies. So that's a phenomenal success. And certainly for me as a banker and as a financier, to stand up a program in this time frame, I know we've just turned the 1st of May, but essentially this was done all in the month of April. Phenomenal turnaround on the program, and I'm very proud of my team that made that happen. So that was the first really program that was launched. In parallel, we launched what was called the Business Credit Availability Program, and that's between BDC and EDC. Those are each $20 billion programs announced by the Prime Minister.
BDC being another federal crown corporation.
Oh yes, thank you, Perrin. I have a lot of acronyms. Apologies for using them.
We are in Ottawa.
Yes, that's right.
So the territory.
That's right. That's the Business Development Bank of Canada, a sister crown corporation to EDC. And the Prime Minister announced that both organizations would make $20 billion available each. So that's a $40 billion program. And what it's aimed at is companies that are slightly larger. So in both the BDC and the EDC side, it's for loans, either jointly lent by BDC up to $6.25 million with your financial institution, or in the case of EDC, we actually guarantee the financial institution that they will be repaid. And this is for new money, new liquidity to go to companies. So that's the intention of it, to give the banks the confidence to continue to support these small companies with additional lending to them. Now, it's a little bit different, Perrin, because now you're starting to get into structuring of agreements with your bank, with the companies themselves. It's quite a different product. We're seeing a lot of interest in terms of people signing up on our website to ensure they're eligible for that, but we haven't seen a lot of money flow yet, even though the program was announced at the end of March. So that's something that I'm looking at with my team every day. I'm tracking, how many applications have the banks received, what's the problem with not getting the money to flow, and do we need to adjust the parameters? Because we're very clear that getting liquidity out is job number one. And if we see that the products aren't working, well, we're going to have to say why and try and address that. But we're all very focused on getting money to our smaller businesses. So those are the programs that BDC and EDC are very focused on. It would be true to say that we continue to work on what we'll call product development, but making sure as we address the smaller companies and we start to move up to larger companies, mid-market, we would call them mid-market companies maybe of revenue greater than $50 million up to 300 million. What's the support available to them? And do we need to fill in some gaps that exist in the market for those type of companies? So we're continuing to work on that, Perrin. We haven't announced anything yet. And we're also seeing that there's a number of government programs out there, whether it's the wage subsidy, rent relief, etc. And we sort of need to see the interplay of some of those programs to really understand what customers' needs are. And that's the most important thing. It shouldn't be us designing a program for what we believe is needed. We need to listen to Canadian companies and make sure we're addressing their needs.
Just to eliminate any confusion, because of the name Export Development Canada, people are apt to feel, well, it must be that my business must be in the export business and this loan has to be related to export. Can you clarify that?
No, it doesn't have to be related to export. So going back to those words, domestic powers, the legislation was actually changed so that EDC could lend to all Canadian companies that are just selling within Canada. So we can still do that, or we can now do that business, Perrin, which is great for Canadian companies.
So a small manufacturer in Goderich, Ontario that doesn't export today, but that needs assistance, how would they go about applying?
Yeah, so the best way to apply is through your financial institution. That is absolutely your best way. And there's a couple of reasons for that, Perrin. One is that's the financial relationship that you have today. And therefore, it's easier for you to reach out to your bank or your credit union. Credit unions are an incredibly important part of the financial infrastructure of Canada. You can reach out to someone that you know, your account manager or your bank who has your history. And then the second reason is they will help you with what works for your business. So they have knowledge of many, many programs, not just the Export Development Canada program or the Business Development Bank of Canada program. They know of programs within the bank itself, in other institutions, and they can help you decide for your organization what's the most important.
Be more tailored that way.
That's right. And of course, as you get larger, you could imagine the structure of some of the companies gets more and more complex. So it's really important that you're working with your financial advisors. What we do suggest is if you're already an existing customer of EDC, you need to reach out to EDC, because the first thing that we did, Perrin, well, the first thing that we did was make sure our employees were safe and healthy and got them working from home and up and running. And I'm very proud that we were able to do that seamlessly. But the second thing we did was reach out to our customers and make sure we understood like how we could help them. So that has meant that we've been deferring payments of principal and interest. We've been expanding our insurance programs. We've been dealing with insurance claims in a different way. So if you're an existing customer, please reach out to EDC first, because we'll have your policy, we'll have your financing on file, and we can see what we can do first, which would be really fast and is most important. But then it's absolutely reach out to your financial institution. That's the best way to go.
The figures you were giving about the volumes you're dealing with are quite remarkable. How seamless is this was not something you were doing before? You were pressed into action with very little warning of this. How seamless has the process been in terms of being able to transition into this?
Yeah, so it's gone very well at the EDC side. I'd say there are three main players in this, Perrin. It's the Government of Canada, who sets the parameters for the program and what is it that they want to achieve. So the fact that part of the loan's forgivable, the size of the loan, the parameters of the program. It's ourselves who ensure the funding gets to our third partner, which is the banks. Because you're absolutely right, EDC, notwithstanding we support over $100 billion of business every year, we only have 17,000 customers, so we wouldn't have the ability to reach 500 million Canadian companies in that time frame, but the banks do. So EDC ensures that the funds, the program is established well with appropriate controls, and that we actually fund the banks with the money every day, so that we understand how many applications we receive per day. At the minute, we're funding at the level of about $1 billion a day to the Canadian banks and financial institutions. And another example, Perrin, whereby we actually needed to help the banks establish that. And we started with a smaller number of banks, small being 41, which you're thinking, oh, do we have 41 banks across Canada? In fact, we're now at 230 financial institutions. So that includes the credit unions. We're very happy that we've been able quickly to onboard the credit unions. So that sense of getting geographic coverage across Canada, getting to the places where Canadian companies are doing business has been very important. So the three partners, the government, EDC, and the banks, and really we're not seeing, we watch the statistics every day. We don't see a lot of declines. The money seems to be flowing quite seamlessly in like a 2-day window from application to receipt of funds. As I said on the previous comments, with respect to the guarantee or the co-lending, it's been a lot slower because these are more involved conversations between businesses and their banks. and then making sure their banks understand that they can access these facilities as well. So that's more the logistical challenge. If you're a frontline account manager in the banks, your customers are calling, and you have all these programs to think about from the bank's perspective or from the Government of Canada, and then just understand your customer's business, that's going to take a bit longer. But again, we keep watching the data on that to make sure that we push where needed to try and get the money to flow.
You certainly put your finger on the key concern that we've heard, and that's there are good intentions here in terms of government getting money out to people, but the question is execution. How quickly can we get money to the people who need it so that they're still in business, they're still solvent and able to take advantage of it? And this element of the design of the architecture and being able to get the mechanism to work has been the key priority, certainly, that the Canadian Chamber has had.
Yeah, Perrin, I mean, you actually have set up, I think one of the most important words that we will take away from this crisis is resiliency, if I could only say it, because it is the importance of relying on or having established very strong institutions, very strong processes, very strong networks. We see that with supply chains as well. And really reflecting on how resilient is our economy and the infrastructure and the institutions that are involved with it. That will be one of the most important things, not just for crown corporations like EDC and for our financial institutions, but for companies themselves. So I'm very happy to see the work the Chamber is doing in that regard, because and as much as we are all 110% focused on the crisis at the moment, there will be opportunities coming out of this. There's opportunities for things that we will put in place now to actually, from my perspective, go to help provide support to other companies, other countries. The fact that I see an incredible amount of integration and creation of networks at the moment, mostly with respect to PPE or ventilators or medical equipment. Like, the country is seized with that challenge and is really taking it on. And I'm sure a lot of your members are part of that. And I see a very different business model coming together, where you see combinations of the providers of either the service or the product. You see the people who need it coming and combining together, whether that's provincially, federally, across different types, whether it's you're a service provider or you're a hospital or you just need access to PPE to keep working. And then we like to consider ourselves as a group of facilitators that can actually help those networks grow. Well, imagine if we can meet Canada's demand, we can actually meet the demand of other countries. And this is one sector that we see. Of course, it's not as challenged financially and economically through the crisis, but actually has a real opportunity as we come out of the crisis. So perhaps somewhat a bright note, notwithstanding the challenges that we face at this point in time, Perrin.
One of the things certainly that's amazed me is when the government put out the call for manufacturers to retool to produce medical equipment and supplies. I think it was something like 6,000 companies that volunteered. There were so many that it was impossible for the government to process all of them and assess them. But it speaks to the fact that despite the fact that we've seen a decline in Canada's manufacturing capacity in many ways in recent years, as we've seen offshoring taking place, there is still a tremendous expertise in Canada, and also business demonstrated the ability to turn on a dime, to develop new institutional organizational models and to meet market need. This is encouraging, and it speaks well for where we may go after this is over, but it also means that we've created a public health industrial base, even in the short term. And one of the decisions governments will have to make is whether to maintain that or to allow it to slip away and allow us to be dependent on others. I gather your feeling would be that once we've created something good, we should hang on to it.
Yeah, and we saw that, Perrin, EDC saw that very specifically in previous crises, whereby certain organizations were actually able to not only help in their immediate vicinity or country, but to take that expertise further, further afield. So from an export perspective, what I'm hearing from customers, some of our, some of our existing exporters, is Asia's already starting to open up. And things that are becoming really important now, Perrin, that we realize, but we actually probably don't think about the opportunity, is food security. So today in Canada, we're all talking about logistics, about the supply chain of food. We're very distressed. I'm certainly very distressed when I see food being destroyed in Canada. Yet there are countries now who want to diversify their food imports from. They recognize that they don't want to be so concentrated on either their own domestic food supply chain or on a number of other countries. They want to diversify that. So that's a great opportunity. So we're seeing lots of requests for support from us for those companies that you mentioned that are rotating their businesses into PPE. Can we help them differently? Can we help them with insurance because they're dealing with buyers they don't know anymore? We see the food processors running at full capacity. We see the food supply chain and ag tech. All of that is opportunities for Canada to actually go now and provide into other supply chains. So you're absolutely right. So you think of where people's minds are going now, it certainly is things like food security, health services, services in general, and perhaps parts of the economy that we just took for granted in the past are now really coming to the fore. And I see lots of opportunities. And our light manufacturing sector has really proven that they can rotate and can work together in a very different fashion. And then I think we have to be also recognizing of very traditional sectors in Canada and their importance at this point in time. Mining is a sector that hasn't been as impacted, and Canada, of course, is a mining leader in the world, and we need to ensure that we continue with that. I see a lot developing in what we would call advanced technology. So companies are now interested in, how do I get access to technology like biometrics? How do I make my production more robotic? How do I do things remotely? So technology and connective technology. So I think some of those perhaps emerging clusters in Canada that we were working with, like the seafood aquaculture cluster, AI cluster based in Montreal, tech, bio in out west. Those are all things that are proving to be what people will focus on in the future. And I really think as Canada, we have to capitalize on that.
I'm very pleased to see that EDC is looking beyond the crisis. We're faced with something, with the tsunami that we're in at the present time, that is so fierce that the temptation is to focus simply on the immediate, but we need now to be looking at what sort of economy do we want to build for the future, and what's the foundation for that? And you've put your finger on a number of the key elements. Certainly agri-food is a key strength for Canada, but the resource sector in general, light manufacturing is another example of where we have considerable potential. Digital services, where we've moved that much more strongly in our economy into digital, telemedicine, telelearning, a whole variety of areas. Our goal should be to come out of this, not simply to go back to where we were previously,
That's right,
but to look to compete in the economy of the future as well. So it's encouraging to see that focus. Can I turn to the more traditional side of your business of exports? You were very well positioned to see what's happening in the global economy and what's happening with Canada's exports. How has COVID-19 reshaped both the global economy and Canada's role in it?
Well, Perrin, it's been very challenging. I think I would start with perhaps a fact that not all Canadians understood or realized is a large part of Canadian exports are service-based. And whether those services are professional services, whether it's tourism, arts, entertainment, all the service industries were a huge part of Canada's growing export base. And those have been extremely challenged through this crisis because they're people-to-people interactions. They're a very different type of infrastructure. So that is truly going to challenge Canada and its export performance. We've had that certainly as a challenge with the structure of Canada. I think the second one is oil and gas, and just the sheer demand destruction that has happened to the resource industry, and then compounded by the price destruction and some of the geopolitics that has been happening, particularly in the oil industry, have really challenged Canada. And that's another very significant part of Canadian exports. And then the third one is really transportation, whether that's aerospace, whether it's rail transportation, whether it's automotive. All of those are sectors that are equally as challenged. So we don't need gas for our cars. We don't need new cars. We're not traveling on aircraft. We're not taking vacations. So all of that, what Canada was very strong in exporting, have been very significantly affected. So we are going to see the effect in Canada's export performance. What we need to do, therefore, is reflect on how do we help those industries as much as we perhaps take opportunities where other sectors are opening up more rapidly. So we do need to help those sectors because those are equally part of the industrial base of Canada or the resource base of Canada. And we need all of that to be working together to actually build our exports up. So I think you'll see it's going to be bumpy, Perrin. It's not going to be even for every sector. It's going to look very different. I think, certainly transportation is going to be affected for a longer period of time than what we were talking about. It's already opening up in the ag space. So yeah, we're going to be challenged, and therefore we have to help our existing exporters more than we would traditionally think we would have to. We're going to have to encourage others to equally see opportunities in this time of challenge. And how long will this continue for? Our chief economist would always say that demand is building up, pent-up demand is building. It's linked to consumer confidence. So I think as we start to see economies open up, as we start to see consumers get confidence, then we will start to see increased trade flows. But the most important thing, Perrin, regardless of everything I've said about sectors and importance of industry and infrastructure, is actually public health. If we do not flatten the curve, if we do not come out of this in an orderly fashion and follow the guidelines of public health, we exacerbate what I see will be boom-bust type cycles. And therefore, for me, the advice I'm giving is we have to respect our public health officials. We have to ensure Canada emerges from this orderly and in a strong way, so that in fact we can take opportunities and can rebuild some of the capacity and the strength of the exports that we have.
Well, that brings me to the final topic I wanted to touch on, and that's how you see the future. Clearly, until such time as there's a vaccine, there is no normal. There will be a new normal, I guess, that we evolve into, but it's a very different world that we'll be emerging into as we come back out of our houses. Looking down the road, 5 years from now, are you basically an optimist or a pessimist? What do you see in terms of the opportunities for Canadian businesses? Is it going to be the sort of slow growth that we've seen, or is there a potential for us to significantly improve our position?
Well, I'll start, Perrin, as to how I'm even thinking, just in our own business of EDC. And I just was speaking with my board this week, and going into this crisis, we were reflecting a lot on Canada's export performance and how we could help that over a 10-year cycle, because there's many industries that we need to see the investment in research and development start to come to fruition, and therefore, you know, you need to take a long-term perspective to that. Certainly, that's harder to do in this context. And I think, you know, so even on that, we've said, well, let's think about the 18 months that we're faced with now. How can we ensure that as companies get liquidity, there is going to come a restructuring phase where that liquidity then needs to be repaid back, and we are in a new normal. So we're going to have to see companies restructure themselves through that, whether that's their products, their customer base, their size. So that's what I mean by bumpy. It's not going to be that easy. So we need to be there for a longer period of time. Do we see it? You know, it's hard to say. Consumers can turn quite quickly. Consumer demand is just such a huge part of export import type performance. That goes back to confidence. It could turn quickly, and it will depend on different industries. So really hard to give you an idea. The thing that inspires me is the entrepreneurship that exists in Canada, the way companies have dealt with the crisis, either preserving their ability to come through a period that looks very different, and just getting ready for what might be the new normal. So hard to say. There will be opportunities, definitely, and we have to encourage companies, and we have to try and find them and help facilitate them. That's part of our role as EDC. I am encouraged with what I see in Asia. I have to say that they were the first into the crisis. They're emerging. My companies, my customers are telling me they're seeing orders coming from China again. There's activity in Japan, same in South Korea. Australia's coming through and coming out. It's a huge destination for Canadian companies. So many of our large export markets really starting to come through. And of course, we all see the statistics that lag, which is export performance and GDP. So we're going to need the consumers in those places to start creating the demand again. And then hopefully we see it. I think Europe will be slower. It was, you know, second into the crisis. We see the drops and dramatic drops in GDP in the first quarter. And I think what worries me the most, Perrin, is actually the US, because it is we are such a concentrated US supplier. And, you know, just the performance of the US and how it's probably last into the crisis and how that will unfold. So this really is a public health trajectory. And I think consumers, trade flows will follow the public health situation.
Certainly, if we see that the U.S. emerges too rapidly and that we see a relapse into the disease again, the impact on the global economy and certainly on Canada's economy would be major. Well, Mairead, as we navigate the current crisis, as we look to a future which is uncertain, has both enormous opportunities and great challenges, we're very fortunate in Canadian business to have EDC there and to have the imagination, the vision, and the drive that you bring to the corporation. EDC are great partners for the Canadian Chamber, and you provide an essential service for Canadian businesses. And we're very grateful to you for being with us today. Thank you for all the work you and your colleagues are doing, and we look forward to partnering with you in the future.
Wonderful, Perrin. Thank you for the opportunity, and we're delighted to be a partner of the Chamber. And I can tell you that maybe my last comment is I'm very proud of my team at EDC, and the thing that they're most proud of is serving Canadian companies. That's what gets us up in the morning. It's why people join EDC, and this is their time to really bring that to the fore. So I wish all your members to stay safe and healthy, and please let us know, Perrin, if there's anything we can do to help your members.
We will indeed. Thank you again.
Thank you, Perrin.